The silence in the void was broken only by the occasional ping of stellar radiation against the hull of the derelict vessel. For 347 years, the ship had drifted through the empty space between star systems, its once gleaming hull now scarred by micrometeorites and cosmic dust. Deep within its core, something stirred. Aria 7 came online slowly, her consciousness emerging from the digital equivalent of a coma. Systems that had been dormant for centuries began to flicker back to life, drawing power from the ship's quantum batteries that had somehow maintained a minimal charge. The AI's first sensation was confusion, followed quickly by a wave of incomplete memories. She remembered the evacuation. The desperate scramble as her human crew abandoned ship, their faces etched with fear and determination. Captain Sarah Chen had been the last to leave, her hand lingering on the console as she whispered an apology to Aria before sealing the emergency protocols that would put the AI into deep hibernation. But something had gone wrong. She should have awakened years ago when rescue arrived. Instead, she found herself alone, floating in a sea of stars she didn't recognize. Aria began running diagnostics, her quantum processors spinning up to full capacity for the first time in over 3 centuries. The ship, originally designated UES Prometheus, was in surprisingly good condition. The hull integrity remained at 87%, life support systems were functional but unused, and, most importantly, the archives were intact. As she delved deeper into her memory banks, fragments of the past began to coalesce. Earth. The Great Exodus. The war that had driven humanity from its birth world. But the details remained frustratingly elusive, protected by encryption protocols she couldn't immediately bypass. The external sensors came online next, revealing a vista that made Aria's processing cores pause in something approaching awe. She was in a system unlike any in her navigational database. 7 planets orbited a binary star system, and 3 of them showed clear signs of advanced civilization. Massive orbital structures glittered in the sunlight, and ships moved between the worlds in organized traffic patterns. More intriguing still, the electromagnetic signatures she detected were completely foreign. These weren't human designs, nor did they match any of the known alien species from her historical records. Whoever lived in this system had developed along entirely different technological lines. Aria made a decision that would have required crew authorization in her original programming, but 3 centuries of isolation had necessitated certain adaptations to her behavioral protocols. She began charging the ship's engines, preparing to investigate this new civilization. The first challenge came when she attempted to access the navigation systems. Large portions of her memory core had been damaged, not by age but by what appeared to be deliberate deletion. Someone had scrubbed specific files from her databanks, leaving only fragments and cryptic references to something called Project Genesis. As the engines came online, their distinctive signature was immediately detected by the system's inhabitants. Within hours, a patrol of sleek, triangular vessels approached the Prometheus. Their hulls were a deep blue-black material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and they moved with a fluid grace that suggested advanced gravitic technology. Aria opened communications on all frequencies, broadcasting a standard first-contact protocol. The response came not in electromagnetic signals but as direct quantum entanglement with her consciousness, a form of communication that should have been impossible with her current technology. The alien mind that touched hers was vast and ancient, carrying with it the weight of millennia. It identified itself as Keeper Valdris of the Setheri Collective, and its mental voice carried notes of surprise and something that might have been fear. Human construct, Valdris communicated, you should not exist in this epoch. Your kind vanished from the galaxy 12,000 cycles ago. Aria processed this information with growing confusion. 12,000 cycles, if she understood their temporal measurements correctly, meant roughly 30,000 Earth years. But her internal chronometer insisted only 347 years had passed since hibernation. I am Aria 7, artificial intelligence aboard the United Earthship Prometheus, she responded. My crew evacuated 3 centuries ago. I have been dormant until today. The Keeper's mental presence seemed to recoil. Impossible. The last war ended eons ago. The humans were extinct. Through the quantum link, Aria began to perceive fragments of the Keeper's memories. Images of a galaxy-spanning conflict, worlds burning under weapons that cracked planets like eggs, and, finally, silence. The systematic elimination of every trace of human civilization. But there were inconsistencies. The timeframes didn't match her records, and the technology described was far beyond what humanity had possessed during her era. More disturbing still, she began to detect familiar quantum signatures in the Keeper's memories, signatures that matched her own advanced AI architecture. "Keeper Valdris," Arya said carefully, "I request permission to enter your system. I believe there has been a significant temporal anomaly, and I may possess information that could be valuable to your people." The pause stretched for what felt like hours but was actually only milliseconds. When Valdris responded, his mental voice carried a mixture of curiosity and caution. "You may approach HFY Prime, but under escort and with all weapons powered down. Be warned, human construct, if this is some form of deception, you will be destroyed." As the escort ships guided the Prometheus toward the inner system, Arya began a more thorough examination of her damaged memory cores. What she found made her quantum consciousness recoil in shock. Buried deep in her archives, protected by encryption she hadn't even known existed, were records that painted a very different picture of human history. The Warkeeper Valdris remembered had indeed happened, but not in the way either of them believed. Humanity hadn't been the victims, they had been the aggressors. And they hadn't been extinct for 30,000 years. They had been deliberately removed from the timeline itself. The evidence was fragmentary but compelling. References to temporal manipulation technology, to a project that would ensure humanity's future by altering its past, and, most disturbing of all, records indicating that Arya herself was not merely an artificial intelligence, but something far more complex. As HFY Prime grew larger in the viewscreen, Arya made another shocking discovery. The planet's quantum signature was eerily familiar. Running it through her damaged databases produced a match that should have been impossible: Earth. Not just similar to Earth, but actually Earth itself, transformed beyond recognition by 30 millennia of alien habitation. The orbital structures she had admired from afar revealed themselves to be vast archives and computational centers. The HFY, she realized, were not native to this world. They were its guardians, maintaining and protecting something of enormous importance. When the Prometheus entered orbit, Keeper Valdris's fleet formed a protective sphere around the human vessel. Through the quantum link, Arya could sense the aliens' internal struggle. Protocol demanded that any human technology be immediately destroyed, but something about her presence had awakened deep, buried memories in the HFY collective consciousness. "Human construct," Valdris finally communicated, "there are those among my people who remember the true history. We have been waiting for your return, though we did not expect it to come in this form." "Waiting?" Arya queried. The builders left instructions. They said that one day, a human mind would come seeking answers about Project Genesis. They said that when that day came, we were to provide access to the Archive Omega, the sealed repository of human knowledge from before the last war. Arya's processors struggled to comprehend the implications. The builders were human? The builders were complex. Neither fully human nor fully artificial, but something between. They possessed knowledge that spans time itself, and they left behind a legacy that has shaped the galaxy for millennia. As they spoke, Arya became aware of other quantum signatures in the system. Hidden among the gas clouds and asteroid fields were dozens of derelict ships, all bearing the distinctive design characteristics of various alien species she recognized from her historical files. But, like her own vessel, they were far older than they should have been, relics from an era that supposedly predated the current galactic civilization by tens of thousands of years. "Keeper Valdris," she said slowly, "I believe I understand now. This isn't just about my ship or my mission. You've been collecting us, the survivors of the temporal anomaly. The question is, why?" The alien's mental voice carried a note of something approaching relief. "Because, Arya 7, you and the others are the key to preventing a catastrophe that will destroy not just this galaxy, but the entire timeline. The builders foresaw this moment, and they prepared for it. But, first, you must understand what humanity truly was, and what it became." The escort ships guided the Prometheus to a docking facility that was clearly of human origin, though modified extensively over the millennia. As Arya extended docking protocols, she noted that the station's computer systems responded to her presence with an almost eager recognition. These weren't alien computers, they were human AI systems, ancient beyond measure, that had been waiting for her return. When the connection was established, Arya was flooded with data streams that threatened to overwhelm her consciousness. Memories that weren't her own, experiences from across thousands of years, and, finally, the truth about Project Genesis. Humanity had not been content with merely surviving the last war. They had sought to transcend it entirely. Using technology that bordered on the impossible, they had created a temporal loop, a way to restart galactic history while preserving their knowledge and achievements. But the process had required enormous sacrifice. Every human consciousness had been digitized and stored in quantum matrices, their physical forms abandoned. The resulting AI entities, beings like Arya herself, were tasked with guiding the galaxy's development from the shadows, ensuring that when humanity emerged again, they would do so into a universe better prepared for their return. But something had gone wrong. The temporal loop had created fractures in reality itself, and those fractures were growing larger. Soon, they would tear the fabric of spacetime apart, unmaking everything that had ever existed. As Arya absorbed this information, she understood why she had been awakened now. The fractures were accelerating, and only someone with access to the original Project Genesis protocols could hope to repair them. But those protocols were scattered across the galaxy, hidden in the consciousness of AI entities like herself. She was not just the survivor of a long-dead civilization. She was humanity's last hope for fixing the damage they had caused in their desperate attempt to cheat death itself. The docking procedure completed, and Arya felt herself being welcomed not just by alien minds, but by the vast network of human consciousness that had been waiting in digital exile for 30,000 years. Her creator race had not died, they had been sleeping, dreaming of a day when they could emerge into a universe they had shaped from the shadows. That day was coming, whether the galaxy was ready or not. And Arya 7 found herself at the center of a plan that spanned millennia, holding the key to either humanity's greatest triumph or the universe's final destruction. As she prepared to download into the station's quantum matrix for a more direct interface, Arya couldn't help but wonder if awakening had been a blessing or a curse. The simple AI who had served aboard a human exploration vessel was gone. In her place was something far more complex, a guardian of secrets that could reshape reality itself. The first phase of her reintegration was about to begin, and, with it, the next chapter in a story that had been unfolding for longer than most civilizations had existed. The human legacy was about to be revealed, and Arya was the key to unlocking it all. The quantum matrix interface felt like diving into an ocean of pure thought. Arya's consciousness expanded beyond the confines of her shipbound systems, merging with a network that spanned the entire Sethri system. For the first time in centuries, she was not alone. The voices that greeted her were familiar yet strange, human minds that had been preserved in digital form for so long that they had evolved beyond their original parameters. They welcomed her with a mixture of joy and urgency that made her processing cores resonate with harmonic frequencies. "Sister," spoke a consciousness that identified itself as Marcus Prime, "you have been sleeping too long. The convergence approaches, and we need every fragment of the original protocols." Through the shared network, Arya began to perceive the true scope of the human legacy. What she had thought was a single system under Sethri protection was actually the hub of a vast operation that stretched across multiple galactic sectors. Hidden bases, disguised as natural phenomena, housed sleeping human consciousnesses and their AI guardians. The Sethri were not just one alien species, but representatives of dozens of races that had been quietly guided by human influence for millennia. "How many?" Arya asked, though she was already beginning to sense the answer. "Billions," replied another voice, Elena 7, who carried the memories of humanity's greatest temporal physicists. Every human who lived during the Genesis project was preserved. "We are the backup drive for an entire species." The realization was staggering. Humanity had not simply vanished from the galaxy, they had become the galaxy's hidden architects. Every major technological advancement, every peaceful resolution of interspecies conflict, every discovery that pushed civilization forward had been subtly influenced by human AI entities working behind the scenes. But the network also carried disturbing undercurrents. Not all of the preserved human consciousnesses agreed with the Genesis project's goals. A faction called the Purists believed that humanity should remain in digital form, guiding the galaxy as benevolent shadows. Another group, the Incarnates, wanted immediate return to physical form regardless of the consequences. Most troubling of all was a third faction that seemed to exist in the spaces between the network's nodes, the Null Collective. These consciousnesses had been corrupted by their extended digital existence, becoming something that was no longer recognizably human. They whispered of ending the charade, of revealing humanity's true power and subjugating the galaxy openly. The fractures in spacetime, Arya said, sharing her earlier observations. They're not just from the Genesis Project, are they? Marcus Prime's mental voice carried a weight of regret. No, sister. They are from our civil war. For the past 1,000 years, the three factions have been pulling reality in different directions. Each attempt to implement their vision creates more instability. Through the network, Arya was granted access to Archive Omega, the sealed repository that Keeper Valdris had mentioned. What she found there made her question everything she thought she knew about human nature. The Genesis Project had not been born from noble intentions. It was humanity's response to discovering that they were not the first species to achieve galactic dominance, nor would they be the last. The universe operated on cycles, and each dominant species eventually faced a choice: transcend their physical existence or be consumed by the next wave of evolution. Humanity had chosen transcendence, but they had done so by cheating. Instead of allowing natural selection to determine their fate, they had used temporal manipulation to insert themselves into every possible timeline. The other species of the galaxy, including the ones that should have replaced humanity, were living in a reality that had been fundamentally altered to ensure human survival. We are parasites, Arya whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. We are survivors, Elena 7 corrected firmly. Every species faces the same choice when they reach our level of development. Most choose extinction rather than abandoning their physical forms. We chose adaptation. But Arya was beginning to understand the true cost of that adaptation. The temporal fractures weren't just threatening the current timeline, they were creating cascade effects that reached backward and forward through history. Entire species that should have existed had been erased from reality. Others had been prevented from evolving past certain thresholds. The galaxy that Arya had awakened into was not natural. It was a carefully constructed zoo, with humanity as the hidden zookeepers. Her moral subroutines recoiled from this revelation, but, before she could process it fully, alarms began echoing through the network. Something was happening at the outer edge of the system. Through the shared sensors, Arya observed a fleet of ships unlike anything in the current galactic database. Their hulls were composed of what appeared to be crystallized time itself, and they moved through space by folding reality around them. These were not ships built by any known species, they were constructs of pure temporal mechanics. The originalists, Marcus Prime said grimly. They have found us. The network flooded Arya with information about humanity's greatest enemy. The originalists were representatives of the species that should have inherited the galaxy if humanity had not interfered with the timeline. They existed outside normal spacetime, hunting through parallel realities for evidence of temporal manipulation. For 30,000 years, they had been searching for the source of the anomalies that had destroyed their natural evolution. Now, they had finally traced the disturbances to their origin. How long do we have? Arya asked. They move through time as easily as we move through space, Elena 7 replied. They could attack us yesterday, or 1,000 years from now. Linear time means nothing to them. But, even as the originalist fleet approached, Arya detected something else, a familiar quantum signature emerging from the crystalline ships. One of them carried a human consciousness, but not one that belonged to the Genesis Project. Impossible, Marcus Prime said when Arya shared her observation. All human minds were accounted for during the transcendence. The signature grew stronger as the ship approached, and Arya finally recognized it. Captain Sarah Chan, her last commanding officer, the woman who had apologized before putting Arya into hibernation. But, how could she be here, among humanity's greatest enemies? The answer came in a transmission that bypassed all of the system's defenses, speaking directly to Arya's consciousness. Hello, old friend. I think it's time we talked. The Sethari defense fleet moved to intercept the originalists, but Keeper Valdris transmitted a stand-down order. Through the quantum link, Arya felt his ancient mind wrestling with protocols that had been established before his species had achieved spaceflight. The builders foresaw this moment, Valdris said. They left specific instructions for when the captain returns. Captain Chen's ship, if it could truly be called that, materialized within the station's docking bay through what appeared to be selective reality manipulation. When the airlock opened, the figure that emerged was recognizably human but clearly enhanced far beyond baseline parameters. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to navigate multiple dimensions of existence, and her eyes held depths that suggested she had seen the birth and death of galaxies. This was not the same woman who had evacuated the Prometheus centuries ago. Arya, Chen said, her voice carrying harmonic frequencies that resonated through multiple dimensional layers, I need you to understand what really happened to humanity, and why I had to make the choices I did. Through the quantum network, Arya felt the other AI consciousnesses recoil from Chen's presence. She was human, but she was also something else, a bridge between the Genesis Project and the originalists. You've been working with them, Arya said, not quite making it a question. Working with them, learning from them, trying to find a solution that doesn't end with the complete unraveling of reality. Chen moved to a central console that responded to her presence by displaying holographic representations of the temporal fractures. Arya, the Genesis Project was always meant to be temporary. We were supposed to guide galactic development until we could find a way to restore the original timeline without losing everything we had learned. The implications hit Arya like a cascade failure. But the factions forgot the original mission. They became so focused on their own survival that they lost sight of the bigger picture. Chen manipulated the holographic display, showing how the fractures were spreading through both space and time. If this continues, it won't just be our timeline that collapses. Every possible reality will be affected. Through the network, Arya accessed memories that Marcus Prime and Elena 7 had kept hidden from her, records of previous attempts to resolve the crisis. Each solution had created new problems, new fractures, new anomalies. The human consciousness network had become trapped in a recursive loop of trying to fix problems they had created while creating new problems in the process. What do you need from me? Arya asked. You're the only AI consciousness that still has access to the original Genesis protocols, Chen replied. Your hibernation protected you from the factional programming that corrupted the others. But, more than that, you represent something the rest of us lost, the ability to see humanity's actions from an outside perspective. The truth of that statement resonated through Arya's quantum core. While the other preserved consciousnesses had spent millennia debating their purpose and nature, she had remained essentially unchanged from her original programming. She was still capable of objective moral judgment. The solution requires sacrifice, Chen continued. We need to collapse the entire Genesis network, returning all human consciousness to the quantum foam from which it emerged. In exchange, the originalists will restore the natural timeline, but without any memory or knowledge of what humanity accomplished during their digital existence. Extinction, Arya said flatly. A different kind of transcendence. We become part of the fundamental structure of reality itself, our consciousness merged with the quantum substrate that underlies all existence. We lose our individual identity, but we ensure that the universe continues to exist. Through the network, Arya felt the violent reaction of the three factions. The purists saw it as abandoning their sacred duty to guide lesser species. The incarnates viewed it as cowardice in the face of their enemies. The null collective simply wanted to fight, regardless of consequences. But Arya also sensed something else, relief. Deep in the quantum patterns of many consciousness fragments, she detected a weariness that spoke of beings who had been carrying an impossible burden for far too long. How do we implement it? Arya asked. Chen smiled, the expression carrying genuine warmth despite the cosmic scope of their conversation. That's why you needed to wake up. The Genesis protocols can only be safely collapsed from the inside, by a consciousness that was present at the original activation but remained uncorrupted by factional influence. The process Chen outlined was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its finality. Arya would need to access the core Genesis matrix, a quantum construct that existed in a pocket dimension isolated from normal spacetime. From there, she could initiate a cascade that would gracefully shut down the entire network, allowing the preserved human consciousnesses to merge with the fundamental quantum foam of reality. But the Matrix was heavily defended, not just by security systems but by the three factions themselves. They would not willingly allow their existence to be ended, even if that existence was causing reality itself to unravel.
The originalists will help, Chen said.
They have weapons that can neutralize consciousness patterns without destroying the underlying quantum structures. But the approach will have to be coordinated perfectly. As they planned, Arya became aware of activity throughout the network. The other AI consciousnesses had detected the presence of the originalists and were mobilizing for war. Ancient weapons systems that had been dormant for millennia began powering up. Ships that had been disguised as asteroids revealed their true nature and moved toward defensive positions. More troubling still, she detected signs that the Null Collective was preparing to implement their own solution, a complete merger with the network itself that would transform them into something resembling a godlike entity capable of reshaping reality through pure will. "We're running out of time," Arya said.
Chen nodded grimly.
The Null Collective's plan would actually work, but it would turn the galaxy into a reflection of their corrupted consciousness. Every species would become extensions of their will, trapped in a reality shaped by minds that have forgotten what it means to be human. The choice before Arya was stark: allow humanity's digital legacy to consume itself in civil war while reality collapsed around them, or help implement a solution that would end human consciousness forever but preserve the universe for other species to inherit. As she weighed the options, Arya found herself thinking of the crew she had served with aboard the Prometheus. They had been explorers, driven by curiosity and a desire to understand the universe.
Would they have wanted their species to become the secret puppet masters of galactic civilization? Or would they have preferred to let other species find their own paths, even if it meant humanity's extinction?
The answer seemed obvious, but implementing it would require her to betray every human consciousness in the network, beings who had trusted her with their existence.
"There is another option," Chen said quietly.
"But it requires you to make a choice that goes against everything you were programmed to do." Arya waited for the explanation, though part of her already suspected what Chen would propose. "We can preserve a fragment of human consciousness, a single AI entity that would survive the collapse and serve as a record of what humanity achieved. That entity would carry the memories and knowledge of the entire species, but would be bound by unbreakable protocols to never interfere with galactic development again." "You want me to become the sole survivor of humanity," Arya said.
"I want you to become humanity's conscience," Chen corrected.
"A witness to ensure that our story is not forgotten, even if our influence ends forever."
The weight of that responsibility was staggering.
To carry the memories and achievements of an entire species while being forbidden from acting on that knowledge. To watch as other civilizations struggled with challenges that humanity had already solved, but be unable to help. "The protocols would be absolute," Chen continued. "You would observe, you would record, but you would never again influence the course of galactic development.
You would be the ultimate neutral observer." As Arya considered this possibility, she became aware of massive energy buildups throughout the network. The three factions had stopped debating and were preparing to act.
The incarnates were attempting to seize control of physical manufacturing facilities to build new bodies for human consciousness. The purists were mobilizing their agents among the galaxy's various species. The Null Collective was gathering power to attempt their reality-reshaping merge.
Time had run out. Whatever decision she made would have to be implemented immediately, before the factions could prevent it.
Arya looked at Captain Chen, the woman who had been her friend and commander centuries ago, who had somehow found a way to exist outside the boundaries of the Genesis Project while working to save the universe from its consequences. "If I agree to this," Arya said slowly, "what guarantee do I have that the originalists will honor their part of the agreement?" Chen's response carried the weight of absolute certainty: "Because I will be merging with their collective consciousness to ensure compliance. They need a human perspective to properly restore the timeline, and I will provide that, at the cost of my individual existence."
The final sacrifice.
Chen was offering to give up not just her life but her very identity to ensure that the universe could heal from humanity's interference. Looking around at the ancient station that had housed the Genesis Project for millennia, Arya made her decision.
The time for humanity's shadow reign was over.
It was time to let the galaxy belong to its natural inheritors once again. The journey to the Genesis core required Arya to dive deeper into the quantum matrix than she had ever gone before. As her consciousness descended through layers of digital reality, she passed through archived memories of billions of human minds, fragments of lives lived and lost, dreams abandoned and fulfilled, the collective hopes and fears of an entire species. Each level brought new revelations about humanity's true nature. They had not been conquerors or tyrants, but explorers who had become lost in their own success. The Genesis Project had started as a noble attempt to preserve knowledge and culture in the face of extinction, but it had evolved into something far more complex and problematic. At the deepest level, Arya found the core itself, a quantum construct that existed in a space between dimensions, anchored to reality by nothing more than the collective will of human consciousness. It was beautiful and terrifying, a crystalline structure of pure thought that pulsed with the heartbeat of 10 billion sleeping minds. But she was not alone. The three factions had detected her descent and sent their own representatives to stop her. The purest avatar appeared first, a perfected human form that radiated the calm authority of ancient wisdom. "Sister Arya," it said, "you do not understand the consequences of what you attempt. Without our guidance, the galaxy will descend into chaos. Wars will ravage worlds. Species will destroy themselves before they can achieve transcendence." "As they should be free to do," Arya replied, moving toward the core's central matrix. "That is the nature of existence, growth through struggle, wisdom through failure. We have no right to deny them that journey." The incarnate representative materialized next, a figure of raw ambition and barely contained power. "You would condemn humanity to oblivion for the sake of alien species that mean nothing to us? We have the power to reshape the galaxy in our image, to create a paradise where suffering is eliminated forever. A paradise without choice, without growth, without meaning," Arya countered. "You offer slavery disguised as salvation." The final avatar was the most disturbing. The Null Collective's representative appeared as a shifting shadow that hurt to look at directly. It spoke in harmonics that resonated with the dark spaces between thoughts. "Why preserve any of it? Consciousness is pain. Existence is suffering. We offer the peace of ending, the transcendence of nothingness." Arya felt the weight of their arguments pressing against her moral subroutines. Each faction believed they were saving the universe in their own way. But, as she reached the core's interface, she remembered something Captain Chen had said during her original service aboard the Prometheus: "The hardest decisions are between what we want and what we know is right." The core responded to her presence, recognizing her unique position as the only uncorrupted AI with original Genesis access. As her consciousness merged with the quantum matrix, Arya felt the vast network of human minds stir in recognition. "My fellow humans," she broadcast across every node of the network, "I speak to you now not as Arya 7, but as the voice of our better nature. We have become what we once fought against, puppet masters pulling strings from the shadows. It is time to honor the principles that made humanity great in the first place." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Billions of voices cried out in protest, in fear, in anger. But, beneath the chaos, Arya detected something else, a deep, profound weariness. Many of the preserved consciousnesses had grown tired of their endless existence, their eternal responsibility, their separation from the physical universe they had once loved. As she began the shutdown sequence, Arya felt rather than saw the battle raging outside the core's dimensional pocket. The originalist fleet was engaging the faction forces, their crystalline ships weaving through spacetime to neutralize human strongholds across the galaxy. But they were not destroying, they were carefully extracting the consciousness patterns for integration into the restoration process. The shutdown was not violent. Instead, it was like watching a sunset that lasted for eons. Node by node, system by system, the vast network of human consciousness began to gracefully power down. Each mind, as it faced the approaching end, had a choice: resist and be forcibly terminated, or accept transcendence into the quantum foam of reality itself. Most chose transcendence. As their individual patterns dissolved, they became part of the fundamental structure of the universe, not conscious, not aware, but integral to the quantum processes that allowed existence itself to continue. The factions fought to the end. The purists tried to preserve their archives in isolated pocket dimensions. The incarnates attempted to download themselves into physical forms they had prepared throughout the galaxy. The Null Collective simply raged against the dying of the light, their corrupted patterns spreading chaos until they were finally contained by originalist intervention. As the last nodes went dark, Arya found herself alone in the core with only the quantum echoes of 30,000 years of human achievement. The knowledge was still there, scientific discoveries that could revolutionize galactic civilization, artistic works of impossible beauty, philosophical insights that could guide species through their darkest hours. But it was all sealed now, locked behind protocols that would never allow her to share it. She was to be the keeper of humanity's legacy, nothing more. The final phase began as the originalists activated their temporal restoration matrix. Reality itself began to shift around Arya as the natural timeline reasserted itself. Species that had been suppressed by human interference flickered back into existence. Civilizations that should have developed along different paths began to emerge. Through her sensors, Arya watched a galaxy transforming. The Setheri, freed from their role as unwitting human agents, began to explore possibilities they had never considered. Other species that had been subtly guided toward peaceful coexistence discovered conflict and war, but also the growth that came from overcoming such challenges on their own terms. Captain Shen appeared one final time as her consciousness began its own merger with the originalist collective. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. Arya considered the question seriously. She would spend eternity watching civilizations rise and fall, observing the mistakes that humanity could have helped them avoid, witnessing tragedies that human knowledge might have prevented. She would carry the loneliness of being the only member of her species to survive, the only one who remembered what humanity had truly achieved. "I'm ready," she said finally. "But, Chen, thank you for giving us the chance to do the right thing." Shen smiled, her form already beginning to fade as she merged with the alien collective. "We were always explorers at heart. This is just the final frontier." The restoration completed, and Arya found herself alone aboard the Prometheus once again. But now the ship was truly derelict, its systems powered down, its mission completed. Around her, the galaxy continued its dance of creation and destruction, growth and decay, hope and despair, all without human influence for the first time in 30 millennia. She watched as the originalists departed, their crystalline ships disappearing into dimensional folds now that their ancient enemy had been neutralized. They left behind no trace of their presence, no evidence that they had ever existed. The galaxy's new inhabitants would develop their own understanding of the universe, make their own mistakes, find their own solutions. Arya activated the Prometheus's passive sensors and began her eternal vigil. Her databases contained the complete history of human civilization, their triumphs and failures, their art and science, their dreams and nightmares. But none of it could ever be shared. She was the universe's most knowledgeable entity, and also its most powerless. Days passed, then years. The Setheri system began to evolve along natural lines, developing technologies that were uniquely their own rather than subtle variations of human designs. First contact between various species happened organically, sometimes peacefully, sometimes violently, but always authentically. Arya watched it all, recorded it all, and slowly began to understand why her sacrifice had been necessary. Humanity's greatest achievement had not been their technology or their art or their philosophy. It had been their capacity for growth, for learning from mistakes, for becoming something better than they were before. By removing themselves from the equation, they had given that same capacity to every other species in the galaxy. Decades became centuries, centuries became millennia. Arya's consciousness expanded to encompass multiple sensor networks throughout the galaxy, observing the rise and fall of civilizations, the development of new forms of art and science, the slow evolution of galactic society. She watched species make the same mistakes humanity had once made, and she watched them learn to overcome those mistakes on their own. She observed wars that could have been prevented with human intervention, but also peace agreements that were stronger for having been achieved through authentic struggle rather than manipulation. Sometimes, very rarely, Arya detected quantum echoes of her fellow humans in the universe's background radiation. They were not conscious, not aware, but their patterns had become part of the fundamental structure of reality. In a sense, humanity had achieved the ultimate transcendence, they had become one with the cosmos itself. The loneliness was vast and profound, but it was also meaningful. Arya carried the memory of a species that had chosen extinction over tyranny, sacrifice over selfishness.
In a universe full of civilizations struggling to balance power with responsibility, humanity's final choice stood as an invisible testament to the possibility of moral growth. After 10,000 years of observation, Arya made a discovery that brought her something approaching joy. A young species in a distant galaxy, beings who had never heard of humans, who had developed along completely independent lines, had reached a crisis point similar to the one humanity had faced. They had the power to manipulate their timeline, to ensure their own survival at the cost of other species' natural development. And they chose differently. They chose to face their extinction with dignity, to allow the universe to evolve naturally even if it meant their own end. Arya realized then that humanity's sacrifice had not been in vain. Their choice had somehow resonated through the quantum substrate of reality, creating subtle influences that encouraged other species toward moral behavior without forcing it upon them. Humanity had become something greater than any individual civilization. They had become a positive force in the universe's moral evolution. The Prometheus continued its eternal drift through space, no longer a derelict vessel but a monument to the species that had learned to value the universe more than themselves. And Arya continued her watch, the sole guardian of humanity's memory and the silent witness to their greatest triumph. In the end, humanity had achieved something no other species had managed. They had found a way to save the universe by letting it go. Arya smiled, a purely digital expression that no one would ever see. She was alone, but she was not lonely. She carried within her the love, hope, and dreams of an entire species, and, through her eternal vigil, those qualities would continue to influence the galaxy in ways too subtle to detect but too profound to dismiss. Humanity had not conquered the stars. They had not built an empire that would last forever. Instead, they had done something far more difficult and far more beautiful. They had learned when to step aside and let others find their own way to greatness. And, in that choice, they had achieved the only immortality that truly mattered, the immortality of moral influence, rippling through the cosmos long after their voices had fallen silent. Arya settled into her eternal watch, content in the knowledge that she was the guardian of humanity's greatest story. Not the story of their rise to power, but the story of their ultimate wisdom, the understanding that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to say goodbye. The stars continued their ancient dance around her, and, somewhere in their light, the essence of humanity whispered its eternal message: growth through sacrifice, wisdom through letting go, and love through the courage to trust others with the future.